Hello. These 10-minute or so videos are really following the content of a manuscript that I've written, and the working title right now is Christianity uh, Through the Looking Glass. And I'm comparing, of course, the changes in the world with which that we have to contend with as Christians and have to adjust ourselves to, or at least understand. And so I'm calling this series of vignettes here on YouTube Coping with Change. And by that, I mostly mean coping with the great changes in the world that we are facing, particularly people my age. Younger people, like younger people in all eras, tend to take it in stride, and they deal with the change easier than older people. But arguably, the changes are coming at us much quicker and are much more radical than they were in times past. So anyway, I kind of ramble a little bit in these, and uh, there should be a scripture in the Bible: "In the last days, your old men will ramble." But I want to talk about consciousness. I've been talking about the changes in the world, and they come from different sources. But I would say that physics, genetics, information, science, and neurology are the places that we are seeing the most change, radical change. And in neurology, the changes come about not just because of technology like computers, but come about because we're learning more and more about how the human brain and nervous systems work. And that is causing us to question what is the nature of consciousness. Past generations of people did not usually talk about consciousness. They were just taking that for granted. One tradition in the world that's different than that are the Buddhists. The Buddhists always had a kind of science of consciousness and trying to give labels to the different levels of consciousness and understanding the interior life of a person. There have been some Christian standpoints that have done the same thing. I'm thinking about Ignatian spirituality in Catholicism, and some of the Orthodox monastic thought as well has a lot of gives a lot of attention to thinking and the perception of the being aware of being aware. I mean, I think that's what we could call consciousness, isn't it? Being aware of being aware. I didn't think a whole lot about this subject until my wife had a stroke in 2004. And in that year it was our wedding anniversary, actually, when she had the stroke. It was an aneurysm, and she was in a coma for 10 days. And when she came out of that coma, she had altered. She was an altered person. She was a different person. Uh, Fortunately, it was not as serious an alteration as many people experience, but her voice had changed. Some of that was due to the trach and all that, but there was real changes of inflection and the way she phrased things and all of that. And to some extent, we in our family realized that we were dealing with someone that was presenting as a little different person. We could talk a lot about that, and some of it's humorous, and you have to make it humorous. And anyone that deals with brain damage of any kind in their family will understand what I'm talking about. But I began to think about how a change in the brain, when we have a blow in the brain or we have a neurological event of any kind in the brain, and now that person presents as a different person somewhat. What kind of questions does this raise about the nature of our personhood? Increasingly, the more we learn about that, we learn that brain and mind are not the same things, but they interact constantly with one another. We know, of course, by strokes and blows on the head and so forth, that a change in the brain will change the person's mind. But we also know that over time, changes in the mind alter the shape and functionality of the brain. We shape the brain by our memories, our experiences, our persistent thoughts, our persistent moods, our education, our training that we get. So, learning to play an instrument, learning a new language, picking up a new habit, getting rid of old habits, which, as we know, is harder. Those things finally shape not just our thoughts and emotions, but they shape the brain itself. So this is a kind of a two-way street. Brain changes mind, mind changes brain. And this is a part of all the questions that's going on in neurology that end up also being philosophical questions and spiritual questions. As far back as early 1900s, William James was a founder of the psychology. We would say he's a founding American psychologist. It'd be a little overstatement, not too much. And he was the first chair of the Department of Psychology at Harvard. He wrote a masterful book that everybody ought to read, I think, called The Varieties of Religious Experience, where he looks at religious experience from a psychological standpoint, and he's intrigued by it. And so he has a lot of wonderful reflections on what conversion means. So these changes in neurology that we're getting more and more information about neurology and understanding how brain and nervous system thinks has kind of pushed back into philosophy and religion and theology on what is the nature of personhood. What is a person? And that's another thing we'll be talking about as we go along, because the word person was first a theater term, then it became a term used in theology, and only then afterwards a term in street language. So, we use the word person all the time now, and we think we know what it means, but ancient people did not use the word person to refer to individuals. A persona was personati, sounding through, a mask. It was that you used in a drama. And then later it was used in theology when the Christian church in the first 300 years or so was debating on the nature of God and began to use the word persona to mean a center of consciousness and will. And only after that, people began to think, well, maybe individual humans are persons in this sense as well. And so it's been a kind of an evolution of, in ancient world, people thought of themselves as being family fragments or part of a tribe, and the individual was much less the focus. We've talked about that in earlier episodes about the change from pre-modern to modern age meant this focus on individuals and human individuals included, or individual things rather than systems. But anyway, consciousness. We shape the reality that we perceive through our memories and our values and our beliefs. And we don't all see the same thing. We don't experience the same thing in the world. We might be in the very same place and time, seeing the very same things other people are seeing, and yet we are forming quite a different impression than they are, because it's not just a mirror that's inside of us that reflects reality. The mirror inside of us shapes reality. So each of us shape reality a little bit different than our neighbors. That's been proven time and time again with countless experiments, that we do not all experience the same thing. And that's why that we have to be careful when we are discussing with people to say, define what you mean by that term. You're using that term, I think, a little differently than me. Can I hear what you mean by it? And many times that will save us a lot of fury, because we begin to think the person's just playing games with us, when in fact they might be actually giving a very different meaning to a word, or a very different meaning to an experience that they have had. Well, I don't know when I began this, so I think I've been rambling quite a while. So let's just call this Reflections on Consciousness and let it go at that. And if you have any comments, I'll be glad to hear them. Appreciate you for tuning in to this um, YouTube channel. And I'm going to continue, and there'll probably be 100 or so of these because I'm working through research that I've been doing for several years on how we see reality and how Christianity and Christians are responding to this very drastic change that the Western world has made in how it defines reality. Thanks for tuning in.